Hello and welcome back. This is the worst movies I watched in 2020. Like my last video, none of these came out last year. This is just the worst films I reviewed on my Instagram in 2020. As before, I will be throwing up my ratings as well as the posts that I made the reviews under. But this time around, the films actually are going to be in a particular order. I'll be going over them from the least painful to the most torturous. So without further ado, let's just dive headfirst into the shithole. Kicking it off at number 15, we got the 1986 film Howard the Duck. I gave it a light to moderate 2 out of 10. This is a weird ass fucking movie. I've seen it twice now. Why? Well, I'm a masochistic madman who wants hell. Granted, it does have its high points. The special effects are pretty cool and awesome at a lot of points. They also suck ass at a lot of other points though. The story is insane and super freaking random, but it is entertaining and unique in its own weird little way, I guess. But holy shit, is this film a hot fucking mess. To address the duck in the room, let's talk about Howard. The animatronics are noticeably off. Have you ever wondered why everything about him is so damn lifeless and inconsistent? Because this film was basically a shit show. 6 different actors wore the suit. The suit was pretty uncomfortable. They had to record Howard's dialogue separately. It's probably why the acting is so bad. The performances are so stilted. Then you've got Tim Robbins, who appears to have had no clear direction whatsoever. It's like the filmmakers told him, "You're an eccentric scientist, go have fun." And then they just worked with whatever he did. Not saying that's what happened or anything, but at least that's kind of how it comes across to me. Also, the filmmakers take the duck concept to such ridiculous, outrageous lengths. Howard, the duck, is from Duck World, where everything is pretty much the exact same as planet Earth, except everything is duck. Yeah, real fucking clever. Rolling egg. Howard and the Heartbreakers. Splash dance. Even play duck with visible duck nips. But that's not the most inappropriate thing about this film and its duck-isms. Once Howard goes to Earth, he has an almost sex scene with a human girl.
What the fuck?
This movie was rated PG. I mean, I know it came out in the 80s and everything, but the PG-13 rating was already in place by that point. I know that this is based on a Marvel character, and admittedly, I haven't read any of the comics or anything, but they gotta be a hell of a lot better than this freaking thing. I could go on and on and on and on and on and on. I'll just end it with this. It's ambitious and creative, but it's often unintentionally comical, or it's just really cheesy or really twisted and is occasionally boring. It's certainly astounding, but I don't think it quite reaches so bad it's good quality. At number 14, I've placed the 2017 film The Snowman. I gave it a 2 out of 10. Wasn't doing lights and moderates and strongs back then. This film is such an incoherent mess. To my understanding, there was a chunk of footage that didn't actually get shot for this film, and they just kind of fixed it in editing, which is kind of obvious because of how messy the story is. I can't even begin to describe the plot as being any more than a detective named Harry Hole that's searching for a serial killer who leaves a snowman as his calling card. First of all, why is that the character's name? I mean, I know it was his name in the novel, but how can someone not hear or read that name and not chuckle? I swear to you, I laughed every single time his name got brought up. Secondly, have you ever made a snowman? I have, and it takes for fucking ever. I know killers sometimes spend extended amounts of time at the crime scene, but seriously, a fucking snowman? For what? Why not just draw a damn picture or something? Maybe he builds them at home and brings them when he goes to commit his crimes. Either way, it's really, really stupid. And thirdly, there is absolutely nothing scary or thrilling about this movie. It's just a boring and meandering film with the unintentionally funny moment here and there. What's so scary about a snowman? I mean, they already had the really goofy poster, but even in the film, it's not scary. The filmmakers try to convey that there's something eerie about them or whatever with the way it throws in the music that's all dramatic and tense sounding, but it always just comes off as hilarious. And to tie it all off, the ending is really, really dumb, and it's even disappointing, which is kind of shocking considering how disappointing the film had been up until that point. So I guess I don't really know why I expected any different. Admittedly, Michael Fassbender does give a pretty decent performance, and the cinematography and everything, the presentation, it's pretty appealing overall. But this film is just really, really bad. At number 13, oh God, kill me. The 2017 movie 50 Shades Darker. I gave it a strong 1 out of 10. I reviewed this film as well as the very first 50 Shades of Grey film last year, and believe me, they're both bad, but I do think that the first one is technically a better film. It has pretty decent cinematography at the very least, so I just didn't see a whole lot of point in bringing up both movies and giving them 2 spots in this list. It just seemed kind of pointless. So many of my criticisms I'm about to levy towards the second film can also be applied to the first. Anyways, this is the most unsexy erotic romance film I have ever seen in my entire life. I can only imagine what 50 Shades Freed is like. This film is not nearly as deep or compelling as it thinks it's being. Christian Grey is honestly a bit of a creepazoid, but apparently he's really desirable. We're supposed to care about him and how he feels despite the countless crazy stalker things he does. If he was a real person dating a girl that you knew, you would be urging her to leave his psycho ass. Anastasia Steele, his love interest, has absolutely zero personality, making it easy for unsuspecting viewers, presumably women, to project themselves onto her. It's for anybody who wants a man with money,
Power.
class,
and does the sex thing really, really, really good. Which, hey, you know, if you're into that, that's cool. You know, we all got our not so good movies that we can't help but enjoy. I'd say that this film wasn't for me or anything, but that would imply that I can't enjoy an erotic romance film, which is far from true. Not only do I enjoy films like Basic Instinct and Blue is the Warmest Color, I often go into films that I assume I'm not going to care for and then I'm blown away. So considering how I watch movies these days, I just see this film as being forced. I just see a movie with bland characters, boring scenes with dramatic music to tell me I need to be taking it seriously, tons of cliches, and sex scenes that are not only trying way too hard to be sexy, but they're unearned because the film fails to give me any reason to care about these characters or their romance. So often the sex scenes just kind of come off as goofy and funny, really. And I must say, I really don't care for any of the songs out of the soundtrack, both this film and the previous film. I know a lot of people do, but not only do I not enjoy them as songs, but I've heard them along with other really mainstream generic music at my grocery store job multiple times over the years to the point where they're just excruciating. So yeah, this film is bad, but it is so bad it's good quality. I could only see me returning to this film in a social setting with like-minded individuals where alcohol is a part of the equation. At number 12, I've placed the 2016 film Bad Santa 2. I gave it a light to moderate 2 out of 10. Now, this is probably one of the more watchable films in this list, especially compared with everything else to come. The film is coherently put together. The performances, while they're not great or anything, they're fine. The movie's not boring, and it does have a couple moments that are admittedly somewhat chuckle-worthy. But this is by far one of the most disappointing movies in the list. Not only was this film 10 plus years too late, but it lacks everything that made the original one so good. The original Bad Santa is a film that I would say is fantastic, but not for everybody. It's offensive and despicable in a lot of ways, but it manages to make its characters and its story interesting and compelling. Plus, it's entertaining, funny, and even thought-provoking. But when it comes to this film, I think most people could watch it without being totally turned off by it. But here's the thing, if you haven't watched the original film and you just watched this for the first time, you're not going to care about anything going on and you're probably just going to think it's a lame, edgy comedy. But if you have seen the original film and love it, you're going to hate it because it's such a disappointment. The characters, their motivations, and the relations to one another are so much less defined than they used to be, which is terrible considering that character development, relationships, and motivations was part of what kept you engaged in the original film. You know, aside from the comedy and all the offensive shit. But it's what made you give a shit about what was going on. Watching this, personally, I had no investment in anything going on whatsoever. There's no fresh spin thrown onto anything whatsoever. The comedy, it's subpar at best. 3 of the most prominent characters from the original Bad Santa are nowhere to be found in this movie. Rest in peace to Bernie Mac and John Ritter. And it even occasionally abuses elements elements from the first film. Like the main kid, Thurman. He's all grown up now, but he's still basically the exact same as he was when he was a kid. And yeah, haha, that's funny for like 2 minutes, but it gets old really fast. Not to mention, he's barely even in the movie until the latter half of it. It's like the filmmakers were just at a loss as to how to tie him into the story. It's like this film was written in a totally different headspace, or that it was written by a totally different person who didn't even watch the original movie. Not really sure what happened there. Unnecessary sequels and remakes are a huge pet peeve of mine, the ones that suck ass at least. It's fine if they're awesome, or at the very least passable, but this film isn't either. It's just a somewhat annoying and weak sequel to a film I personally really love. So yeah, pretty disappointing. At my number 11 spot, it's another unnecessary sequel, though I don't have as much of an investment in the original film. So it's not as annoying as Bad Santa 2, but it's a lot less competent and it's way more lazy. A film that I initially gave a strong 2 out of 10, but at this point I would say is really more like a strong 1 to a light 2 out of 10. And that's the 2011 film Hoodwinked 2, Hood versus Evil. First of all, why is that title so horrendous? What's the fucking joke? It's not clever or funny, it's just dumb and confusing. The hood part makes sense. It's dumb, but I get it. But why the TOO version of 2? Like what? Yeah, this is one of the worst animated movies I watched last year. The original film wasn't even that well received, but I guess it was successful enough. The original borrowed the whole Shrek concept of putting some sort of an edgy spin on fairy tales, so it wasn't exactly unique. And with this sequel just being a lesser version of the original, you can imagine how lackluster the experience is. The animation is worse than before. It's just incredibly lazy. The background characters are often just ones that were more prominent characters in the original film, but them showing up in the background makes absolutely no sense because of the change in situation and location. The story sucks. The humor is non-existent, and even the characters are less interesting. I don't really have that much left to say about this one, so we'll just move on. Oh god, I can't stand this next one. Number 10, The Boss, came out in 2016 and I gave it a light 2 out of 10. Easily one of the most annoying Melissa McCarthy films I've seen to date. I absolutely could not stand her character. I didn't get a single laugh for the entire runtime. The jokes were all just stale and unfunny. The story was forgettable. I didn't care about a damn thing going on at all. There's nothing commendable about it, but there's also nothing especially bad about it. These are some of the worst kinds of movies. Bad comedies. It's not trying to be serious or anything like that, so you don't get unintentional hilarity. It's just a comedy movie that's trying to be funny, but since it's not funny, the experience is just dull and tedious. Got nothing else to say about that. Moving on. At number 9, we have another dull and unfunny comedy movie, and that's the 2002 film The Sweetest Thing. I gave it a light 2 out of 10 as well. This has to be one of the most confusing films as far as titles go in this list, as there's absolutely nothing sweet about it. In fact, I argue it's a pretty sour film. The story is borderline non-existent. The entire runtime is basically just bogged down in gross out humor and jokes based on stereotypes. And we all know how I feel about that kind of comedy. It feels that the only reason this film exists is just to boast Cameron Diaz's visual appeal. And don't get me wrong, she's an attractive actress, but we didn't need a film to remind us of that. And even if we did, the filmmakers could have put in a little more effort. I mean, Charlie's Angels films, while they're not amazing or anything like that, at the very least, they're entertaining action comedies, and the jokes, they're kind of lame, but they're still fun movies overall. But here, the filmmakers just put in no effort. It's just a lame and predictable romantic comedy film with shitty characters and crappy jokes. It's not good. Don't watch it. At number 8 is the 2017 film Wish Upon. I gave it a strong 1 out of 10. The main reason I even checked this one out is because I heard that it was so bad that you could watch it as a comedy movie. And honestly, I was a bit disappointed on that front. It definitely has unintentionally funny moments, but for the most part, this film is just really frustrating and really boring. The main character is particularly unlikable. She comes across some box that grants her wishes, and all of her wishes are about her. And every single wish that she makes results in somebody dying, like her dog and her uncle. And even though it's pretty fucking obvious that her wishes have consequences, she still just keeps making wishes. So not only is the main character all about herself, but she's oblivious as hell. And what's also annoying is right before our character dies, they're given maybe 2 or 3 minutes of screen time tops. We We know nothing about them, they're not developed or anything, they're just introduced long enough so they can be killed off. Not to mention, this film kind of plays out like a Final Destination movie, but none of the characters are interesting, the kills are rather tame, which results in an irritating viewing experience. How am I supposed to care about anything? The main character sucks. I don't know anything about the people who are dying in the film, and the deaths are so incredibly unremarkable. On top of that, the soundtrack is bogged down in shitty mainstream sounding pop music. They're pretty out of place in a film like this. It definitely creates an atmosphere and everything, but it's the type of atmosphere you expect from like a high school comedy or drama movie. So yeah, one of the most mediocre horror films I watched last year. If you haven't seen it, avoid it like COVID. But as much as I dislike Wish Upon, it's not quite as frustrating as my number 7 spot, and that's the 2015 movie The Visit. I gave it a light 1 out of 10 as well. When it comes to films that are directed by M. Night Shyamalan, most people know that he's made some really great films and some really not so great films. The Visit is one that's actually fairly received by people, and I do not understand why. It's a found footage film, but it's easily the most fake and unauthentic found footage movie I have ever seen. M. Night takes so many liberties with the presentation, and it makes the whole viewing experience just feel fake as shit. And like Wish Upon, there's nothing scary about this movie, not unless you're like scared of old people. The only thing I find scary about this movie is that there's people who actually think Ed Oxenbold's cringy white boy rapping is charming or funny. And that's another thing. The two main kids are just so dumb and uninteresting, and even when they do something interesting, it's not for good reason, like the lame rapping. I usually can get some sort of enjoyment out of a bad M. Night Shyamalan film, even if it's for unintentional laughs. But this one isn't funny for intentional or unintentional reasons, and it's a horror comedy on top of that. It's just meandering, it's not scary at all, and the whole experience just feels forced and, again, unauthentic. Oh, I know some people are going to hate me for this next movie being in my list, but at number 6 is the 2008 film The Strangers. I gave it a moderate 1 out of 10. Honest to God, this is one of my least favorite horror films I've seen. Period. Admittedly, this might be partially because so many people seem to enjoy this film, even more than The Visit, and I cannot for the life of me begin to understand why. This movie is so repetitive. I really don't care for jump scares. It's the easiest and laziest way to convince the audience that what they're seeing is actually scary. Now don't get me wrong, there's definitely good horror films out there that have jump scares, but they're used sparingly, so the experience doesn't end up being really aggravating. I mean, hell, they even work sometimes for me. But with The Strangers, it just abuses this tactic more than any film I've seen as of late. It's so wash, rinse, repeat. On the door. This happens so often throughout the film, but it's not scary, it's annoying. Along with stupid jump scares, the killers just play peekaboo with their victims for an entire night. Oh no, there's the killer, and oh, he's gone. Spooky. Sometimes it just shows how transparent this film is. There's a point where the main girl is running away, and quietly behind her comes one of the killers, but when she turns around, they're gone. Who are they trying to scare? It's clearly the audience, because the girl definitely did not see her. I know killers often toy with their victims, but no killers in real life would do this. It's moments like this that remind me, yep, I'm definitely watching a movie right now. What's even more annoying than that is that we're supposed to care about these characters and their personal drama despite not knowing a damn thing about them. How am I supposed to care about anything? How am I supposed to be on the edge of my seat? I mean, I guess the masks that the killers use are kind of memorable. But seriously, I can't think of a single original idea that this film presents. Anything that this movie's done, other horror films have done 10 times better. Not every horror film I watch needs to be deep or groundbreaking, but there's nothing fun or unique about The Strangers. Shit, nobody even dies until like halfway through the film. It's just repetitive and unoriginal, and it takes itself way too seriously. And worst of all, it's really, really, really freaking boring. If you enjoyed The Strangers, good for you, but this movie just does nothing but agitate me. Alrighty, top 5 worst movies I watched last year. I'm dying inside right now, but I must prevail. This next movie ruined my fucking childhood. Just kidding. But it is one of the biggest disappointments of my childhood. Number 5, the 2002 made-for-television film Home Alone 4, Taking Back the House. I gave this piece of shit a light to moderate 1 out of 10. Like many people, I loved Home Alone, and even though 2 and 3 weren't as good as the original, I still loved them. Today, I see the flaws in all 3 films, but they were an essential part of my life at one point. When I heard that there was a Home Alone 4 coming out at a young age, I was so excited. I had my DVD recorder set, and I was ready to watch Kevin save the day with his incredible trap building skills. But once I watched it, my soul was crushed. I mean, come on, there's basically no traps in this film. Like, what the fuck? Did the filmmakers not watch the original movies or something? Watching this as an adult, I was ready to truly analyze this film and see if it's really as bad as I remembered it being. I mean, traps weren't the only thing that made the original movies interesting, so there had to be something worthwhile, right? No, not at all. There is absolutely no redeeming factors whatsoever. And the film had some potential. It takes place in a mansion, and on top of that, it's a smart house. That's pretty cool. It has a lot of the same characters, despite it being different actors, and it has a huge fan base willing to watch it. It didn't have to be amazing or anything like that. But no, the actors are far less interesting than the original ones, but that's not even the worst of it. We got Marv, but we have no Harry, yet for some reason, Marv is now shorter and he dresses like Harry. Like I said, there's basically no traps in this film. They're kind of more like pranks than anything else. Definitely not the same thing. The film is technically called Home Alone, but at no point is he ever actually fully home alone. There's always a butler and a maid there, so that's kind of weird. But what makes this movie outright unforgivable is the haphazard attempts to tie itself into the first 2 films' story. Now, Home Alone 2 had already kind of fucked up the consistency with the timeline. Home Alone 1, Kevin is 8. Home Alone 2, Kevin is 10, despite the events taking place exactly 1 year later. Home Alone 4, Kevin is 9, although the events take place after the events in the second film. What is happening? The worst moment has to be when Kevin's dad comes home and sees that the house is flooded. Kevin tries to explain that the bad guys came, even though he never explained to his family before anything about them, but that's not even the point. When Kevin tries to explain what happens, this is what he said, and I'm paraphrasing here.
It wasn't me. It was Marv. Didn't I ever tell you about him? Well, that's another story.
This movie has a lot of damn nerve. If you're going to continue the story, it needs to resemble the originals, but this film doesn't, so just write a new story. It would be far less infuriating to fans like myself. Giving the actors the same names and throwing in all of this clumsy dialogue to remind us that it's a part of the first 2 movies is just so disingenuous. Home Alone 5, I mentioned it in my last video, while being extremely forgettable, it just kind of did its own thing, so at least it was forgivable and didn't give me any reason to be mad at it per se. But Home Alone 4, it just tried to be more than it was, and it just ended up being a really frustrating viewing experience for fans. Which is why Home Alone 4 is not only just one of the worst movies I watched last year, but it's one of the worst movies I've watched ever. At number 4, we have another terrible Christmas movie, and that's the 2004 film Christmas with the Cranks. I gave it a light to moderate 1 out of 10 as well. Technically speaking, I didn't write a full review for this one. I wrote one, but it got so long that it pretty much just turned into a future video script. That's currently on hold, but don't worry, I'll be getting around to it at some point. It could be this Christmas, who knows, we'll see. But anyways, this is easily one of my least favorite Christmas movies. The comedy is just so freaking lame. Here's an example. In the very beginning of the film, there's this elongated joke where Tim Allen's character Luther is getting soaking wet by the rain. The damn joke goes on for 5 or 10 freaking minutes. The story is also super inconsistent. In the beginning of the film, the Cranks' daughter is getting on a plane to go do a Peace Corps assignment, and it's like 2 weeks before Christmas. Some time goes by in the film, and all of a sudden on Christmas Eve, she's just up and at the airport, about to be home for the holidays. The Cranks must have a lot of frequent flyer miles because at a few points throughout the film, they're talking about doing things that are going to save them money. But the shitty jokes and the confusing story aside, what makes this film gas my fire is the fact that it embraces conformity. The Cranks, more specifically Luther, they want to go on a vacation because their daughter's not around and they just want to disregard Christmas just for 1 year. And their neighbors, they're not too happy about that. They constantly harass them throughout the film about it. Don't get me wrong, I love Christmas and I can't stand Grinches myself, at least the ones who are like really vocal about their opinions on it. But the Cranks don't hate Christmas. They just want to save money and just take a year off, have a little relief, not stress about the holidays and just take a simple vacation. And apparently that's a bad thing. The first 2/3 of the film are just them constantly being at odds with everybody they come into contact with. And it's all because they're not celebrating Christmas. Later in the film, the Cranks' daughter calls to say that she's going to be home for Christmas and that she's actually at the airport right at that moment. And guess what? Christmas is back on again. And at this point in the film, as annoying as the neighbors have been, the most detestable character truly comes to light. And that is Luther's wife, Nora. She literally
forces
Luther to cancel their vacation. She tells him that his plan to go on vacation during Christmas is a selfish, stupid scheme. I'm sorry, but fuck her. When their daughter calls, without hesitation, she just lies and says that their yearly Christmas Eve party is happening, despite being completely unprepared for it. I honestly wish that they would not get this party set up in time so that her lies would come to light, but no, despite it being Christmas Eve, everything works out and the party ends up happening due to the aid of their annoying neighbors, despite the fact that they've been treating them like outcasts throughout the entire movie. With all that said, you would think that the only semi-likable character in the movie would be Luther, but even he manages to be kind of detestable. He's kind of a dick in general. He's always stepping on the neighbor's cat, and he even freezes it at one point, as well as his entire front yard, so that everybody, including innocent bystanders like the mailman, can slip and get hurt. And he's just a total submissive when his wife decides to cancel their vacation and have this party, despite his abundantly clear hesitation. He could just stand his ground and call his daughter or take the phone from Nora and tell her the truth. But no, he caves like a little bitch. Like some of the other movies, I could just keep going on and on about this. After all, I do have like a 10-paragraph rough draft on the fucking thing. But we'll save it for another time. So overall, it's just a gross and misguided Christmas film that's trying to be cute and innocent, but it only ends up just being offensive and lame. At number 3, I've placed the 2019 film Ma. I gave it a strong 0 to a light 1 out of 10. I absolutely loathed this film. I don't even want to fucking talk about it, but here goes. Granted, Octavia Spencer does give a pretty decent performance under the circumstances, but aside from that, there's nothing redeeming about this film. All the actors give really lackluster performances. The focal character is a teenage girl named Maggie who just moved to a new town and school. She's just a total blank slate with no personality, and her mom, played by Juliette Lewis, is probably the most annoying character in the whole film. Maggie makes some friends, and I swear to you, every single one of their conversations feels so incredibly unnatural. The acting is horrible, and none of the dialogue feels real. Every time a character spoke, it just felt like they were reading words out of a textbook in like a high school class or something. The movie just dicks around for an hour before anything thrilling even happens. And because this film fails to build any tension, it's just jarring as hell when the horror finally does kick in. Not to mention, the horror itself isn't anything particularly unique or well done. And Ma, the antagonist, her motives are just so messy and unclear. Like, I understand that she was bullied as a kid and she has a lot of resentment for the now grown kids who bullied her, but why does she want to ruin her own daughter's life? Why does she not want her to have any friends? She obviously still feels the sting of being outcasted as a kid, so why does she want her kid to just be isolated and alone all the time, while simultaneously allowing all of her classmates to come and party in her basement? She eventually has all the kids in collars in her basement near the end of the film so she can torture them, but instead of it actually being horrifying or scary, it just makes things more confusing. Like, why does she give the one black kid white face while she actually physically harms all the other kids? Why does everyone seem to wake up in her basement around the exact same time? And even once they do wake up, you know, they're not entirely trapped there. I mean, they have collars around their neck, but they're not locked up or tied up or anything like that, and they could easily just detach the collars, but for some reason they just fucking don't. I hate this movie. I've seen plenty of crappy horror films. Obviously, I've named a few that I find to be that way in this list, but this is the worst one I watched last year. Oh God, at number 2, we had the 2012 direct-to-video film, Gummy Bear, The Yummy Gummy Search for Santa. Gave it a 0 out of 10. I'm pretty sure this is the laziest film, or at least the laziest animated film that I have ever seen in my life. There's so many animation errors, and aside from Gummy Bear, the character designs look like stock characters. Like the defaults you would get in like a 3D animation kit or something like that. The story? What story? It's literally about Gummy Bear and his misfit friends going to save Santa from an alien. Thankfully, this one doesn't overstay its welcome, as it's not even an hour. But that just goes back to what I started this with. It's a lazy movie. You might honestly even be asking, is this movie really worth throwing into this list? I think it is, considering it was distributed by Lionsgate. You know, the Hunger Games, the Saw films. Yeah, that Lionsgate. It's kind of boring, but the sheer laziness definitely makes it amusing. I don't really have much more to say about this one. Just go read my review. Alrighty, number 1. The number 1 worst movie that I watched last year, as well as the worst movie I have seen to date. No joke at all. I've seen it twice now, and the experience was hell both times. And that is the 2009 film, The Nutcracker, The Untold Story, also known as The Nutcracker in 3D. I gave this one a 0 out of 10 as well. It's kind of funny that the 2 worst movies in this list are not only Christmas films, but I coincidentally made them under the exact same post. I guess that's just how the chips fall. I don't know what it is about Christmas movies. Some of them are my absolute favorite films of all time, like Home Alone and National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. But some of them also just so happen to be some of the worst pieces of shit I've laid eyes on. Without a doubt though, this is the worst of the worst. This is supposedly a family fantasy Christmas film? It's about as terrifying as watching The Evil Dead. I mean, just look at this shit. It's horrific, and this face pops up multiple times throughout the movie. I find this film scarier than a lot of horror films I've watched. Scarier than Friday the 13th. Scarier than Night of the Living Dead. Scarier than Child's Play. And don't get me wrong, I love those movies. The Nutcracker himself is pretty unsettling too. His voice is really, really annoying, and it grates on my ear holes. And he has such a stiff, lifeless face. The child actors, they're pretty bad, pretty annoying. And I don't know why actors like Nathan Lane and John Turturro willingly put their faces in this film. It must have been out of some contractual obligation or something. Because who the hell would want to be seen in a film like this? And where the hell was quality control at? This movie was rated PG. I know it's not the MPAA's job to, decide which films need to be distributed or not, but who the hell watched this and was like, yeah, that's a PG right there. This film certainly had budget, so why was no one working on this film? The producers, the special effect artists, the actors. Why didn't nobody tap the director on the shoulder and just say, hey, this is not turning out very good? Like, who funded this? It had to have sounded different in the pitch meeting, because I can't imagine anybody visualizing this film and thinking it would be a hit. And clearly nobody wanted to watch it because it flopped pretty hard. I guess this is the film that Andrei Konchalovsky really wanted to make. But it just goes to show every idea for a movie is not a good idea. In one breath, I can usually appreciate a film to a certain extent if it's boasting creativity or originality. But I just can't with this film. I just can't. It's misguided, it's horrific, and it's annoying. And when this film isn't offending my taste, it's boring. It's definitely memorable, and most of the time it does maintain my interest. But this film is just painful, and both times I watched it, I was just left questioning its existence. Honestly, giving this film a 0 out of 10 was being kind of nice to it. It's honestly a negative 10 out of a positive 10. Never watch it unless you want to be baffled by one of the biggest disgraces to ever hit cinema. This movie causes depression and makes you want to kill yourself. I've got to calm down. It's over now. I've watched it. I've reviewed it. I've placed it in this list. I never need to think about it again. And on that note, that's it. I survived. Those are the 15 worst films that I reviewed in 2020. As I've said before, I enjoy a good shit show. And there's different types of bad films. For me, I like funny bad films and astoundingly awful yet entertaining films. But every so often, I find shit that's just outright unwatchable. But enough about how I feel. What do you feel about these movies I've talked about? Have you seen any of them? Leave your comments down below. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoy what you saw here. Make sure you subscribe. Be sure you follow me on Instagram at Garth_Riot, where you can find reviews and more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.